Thank you, Steve, for not only the idea and putting everything together for us to go and enjoy, but sharing your thoughts. I know I and most who have attended have felt the same points that you have pointed out as well. So we're so grateful. I think you may have started a trend. I do hear rumors of different fellowship groups who are planning to go, and so we thank you for that. Welcome everyone here at worship service for in person and online. We are continuing our series on the 7 churches in Revelation. We're on our 5th church, and we're doing this because it is a unique part of Scripture where Jesus is giving us feedback to individual historic churches. And you may have noticed that the pattern is the same. Jesus will come and he'll offer words of encouragement when appropriate, commendations, words of constructive criticism, and then there are, in the end, rewards. But if you notice as well in all 7 letters, no matter how deep you may have fallen, there's always a path back. No matter how far you may have strayed from the path, there is always a repent, do this, and you shall return to my presence. And so it's just an encouragement that God longs for his churches, no matter where they may be, to be faithful and to be in his presence. And so we come to a church in Sardis, and this is a church in the city of Sardis as well. And this is a church of great wealth. You may have heard of King Midas. Remember, everything he touches is gold. The myth is that King Midas buried his gold under the springs of the city, and the springs under the city. And that Sardis was the first city to develop the technology for coloring textile. So clothes, they were able to infuse color into their clothing. And it was such a huge achievement that single-handedly that technological advancement made them the textile center of the entire Asian area, meaning that Sardis was pretty comfortable financially. And so with that brief background, we want to start here and look at the church that's embedded in this community. And if you look at the stream, we start with the very first words that Jesus says, I know your works. Now, in all 7 letters, he starts off with, I know your works. And then usually afterwards, you find words of encouragement or praise, or at the very least, I know what a difficult city it is for you to be faithful witnesses to me, except for 2 churches, this one and Laodicea. And so it's a church that is struggling. How is it struggling? So if you look at the next screen, you have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. This is our primary focus this morning. That this church was an active church. It was full of life. The sanctuary is packed out. The numbers are growing. There's a spirit of optimism, vibrancy. We are a church that are doing things. We're serving the community, doing good works. When you walk onto the campus of this church, you're swept away by how busy everyone is. And the church was one that seemed to be going places. But Jesus has a problem with this church. The life of the church was only an outer veneer. That if you remove the outer layer and just looked a little deeper, that things were not as it seemed. That the people were not growing, even though they were full of energy. You know, this is like the wax. So, throughout all the sermons, I think of different ways of saying the same thing, right? I think I said in the very beginning of my ministry here, all of my sermons break down into 3 points. So I'm trying to find different ways of saying the same thing. So if you go to these tourist traps, there are these wax museums. I don't know if you've seen those, or you probably have an idea of that. And so if you look at the next screen, this is Angela Bassett, and she is a movie star. And if you look there, one is a wax figure and one is the actual individual. Extremely difficult to tell who's alive and who is full of wax. And if you look at the next screen, what you have is the royal family, and that's the opening of the Madame Tussauds Museum. And there you're trying to figure out who is the wax figure and who is the actual royal family. But if you look at the next screen, you can tell easily who is the wax figures and who are not. A family of 3 costs you $135 to go and experience. experience this, right? Who's alive and who's not? Let me give you one more illustration. If you ever go to a movie studio, my wife and I did out in California, you see these buildings, if you look at the next slide, on the outside, right, walking through and the video and the movie angle, it looks real, right? Very realistic. But if you look around the corner, what you find is that they're hollow outer shells. Just take away the layer, dig a little deep, it's not what you see. This is what Jesus has against the Church of Sardis. That when you first meet the individual, good impressions. The impression that you get is so positive, but just stay a little while, and what you find is not exactly what you have seen. It's a question that we all need to ask. Are we like the Church of Sardis? Because it's a very tough question. Half the time, I like it when things look good. It's not that I don't care, but it's not as important to me what's deeper inside. Because outward appearance means quite a bit. Not many churches in this state get to realize this. Willow Creek is one that started asking this question. So, Willow Creek is started by Bill Hybels. It's a seeker-friendly church, meaning that they have molded and shaped their ministry so that they can attract unbelievers to come to church. And that they did this marketing survey. Why don't you come to church? Because it's really boring. They ask for money all the time. And so they reshaped those so that the worship service became one where it would be not embarrassing to invite your atheist friend. It's like a theater experience where God is the central character. And my wife and I, as I shared before, we attended Willow Creek. We were there about 3 months. We were transitioning from one ministry to another. And mega churches are excellent places to hide out, right? Because they leave you alone. They don't ask you to do things. And so we went for about 3 months, and we saw how vibrant this ministry was. You go on Sunday morning, and it is packed out, 15,000 people. The parking lot is huge, acres and acres of cars. You got coffee shops, cafeterias, bookstores. It's like a Christian mini mall. And then there's a list of ministries that you can either serve or ask, hope for in virtually every area. And yet things were not as they seem. Now, I'm not talking trash about this ministry. I have a lot of respect for what Willow Creek does and what they're good at. But this is from their own study. So they did a study of their church, and they asked this question, are you growing in our ministry? Are you becoming more like Jesus Christ because of the ministries that we offer? And what they have found is that they were great in drawing people. They were not so good in helping them to grow deeper in faith. So this is Greg Hawkins, and one of the concluding statements. He says, we created a variety of programs and services for people to participate in. This is our strategy. We try to get folks who are far from God involved in these activities. We believe the more people are participating in these sets of activities with high level of frequency, it will produce disciples of Christ. Increasing levels of participation in these acts or sets of activities does not, that's the conclusion, does not predict whether someone's becoming more of a disciple of Christ. Bill Hybels laments that they invested millions of dollars in high-tech equipment and cutting-edge staging, and yet none of it was helping his people to grow maturely. This was not what, quote, our people were crying out for, close quote. At the end of the survey, they asked, well, what do you really want? What do you think will help you to grow spiritually? And there were 3 things that came out. Number 1, a place where they can share their inner struggles without being condemned. In other words, a place where they can be vulnerable. A place where people can pray together. And then a place where you can develop relationships so that there's someone next to you during difficult times. None of which requires $1 million stage setting. And at the very end of the report, Willow Creek says, when people came to their church And after they spent some time enjoying all the impressive ministries that they offered, when they really wanted to grow, they left and went to another church. How sad. What is the remedy? What is the path back? If you look at the screen in verse 2, wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete. It's incomplete in the sight of God. See, this is the call. Wake up, right? Repent, wake up. This is the command that Jesus is giving to the church in Sardis, and it's related to their history. So that in the history of the city, there is a moment that I think Jesus may be referencing to. So if you look at the next slide, this is the city up on top. So the city, the main part, the Acropolis, existed on the top, and then on three sides were 1,500 feet precipice, they're cliff. And then in order to access the Acropolis, if you go to the next slide, there's this narrow stretch of land, like a neck, that you need to go across in order to reach the Acropolis, and it was very easy to defend. And so this was known as an impenetrable fortress, because all they needed to do was to defend this narrow stretch of land, and they did not even keep guards over the other 3/4 of the city because they felt they were safe. Until one day, King Cyrus of Persia came knocking on the door, and Cyrus had one guy who enjoyed climbing rocks. Just one guy, and he climbed the 1,500 feet up onto the cliff, unmolested, sneaked into the city, and went and opened the gate for his army to enter. It would have taken an older child probably to drop a rock and could have knocked them off the cliff, but they assumed that they were so safe that they did not keep guards. So later on in history, the word capturing Sardis became a phrase for something that you thought was impossible that someone actually did, right? So for a while we said no one can run a mile under 4 minutes, and then someone breaks it and said, wow, capturing Sardis. It became a model for people not to make assumptions because you may be wrong. Church says to the church, wake up. Or Jesus says to the church, wake up. Don't be like your city. Don't become complacent, thinking that everything is all right when it's not. Don't trust the appearances. Wake up. Because this could be your church. I think every church at the end of the year should sit down together, leaders, representatives of the ministry, and they should ask themselves questions. How are we doing as a ministry? What are our values? Are we living it out? What assumptions are we making about our church and our people? Are we merely an outward facade, living in the glory days of the past? Or are people growing spiritually? Are they carrying the cross? I think at the end of the year, we need to sit down and ask these tough questions. Because I think the most difficult thing to do, especially for a church like ours, it's been around for a long time, is to assume that because you are doing the things the way it's been done, that we're still in a good place. I don't know how many times, not in this church, but other churches and books that I read, and you have pastors who come in and they ask, why do you do it this way? Or something like that. And the response is usually because we've been doing it that way. And perhaps doing it that way is a good way. But how do you know you should continue to do it that way until you ask some of these tough questions? And so Willow Creek gathered all of this data together, and then when they found out some of the answers to their questions, they reorganized their ministry, and what they did was they kept the things they were doing well, so they were still trying to reach out to unbelievers, helping them to connect to Christianity, and then they began to reorganize their ministry so that they could complete the work that was being done for Christ. And so what they did was they shifted. They were no longer going to be spiritual parents. See, that was their mentality. Let's do all of these things for people that come. Instead, they saw themselves as spiritual coaches. We're going to coach them. Don't do things for them that they can do for themselves, but help them to feed themselves and to grow, so that discipleship became a primary part of their ministry. And this is what they realized, that they were running so many ministries with ministry leaders, but they weren't feeding their ministry leaders, and they weren't training new ministry leaders, so that they were getting burnt out, and they were the primary ones that were leaving to other ministries to grow spiritually. And so Jesus says, continuing in verse 3, remember then what you have received and heard, keep it and repent. So that in every movement back, it begins with His Word. And so what you have received and heard, at this time, the letters that are written by Paul and others are being circulated around the churches, and it's being read in the worship services. And Jesus commands them to remember and to obey, right, what you have heard. And so the Word of God is always the beginning point. But secondly, it's also the tradition, so that the stories of the church. So that when you look at the history of Christianity, how did we understand different parts of Scripture? How did theology evolve? And then examples of martyrs and individuals who lived out the faith faithfully. Just like in Hebrews chapter 11, God has a list of heroes that moves us and inspires us. In the same way, in the history of the church, there are individuals that were faithful. And we should learn and grow from them. But there's also a third component here. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to jump out and go to verse 4. You may have still a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. In other words, there are individuals within your church right now who are carrying out their spiritual lives faithfully. They live with integrity. There's no hypocrisy. That their outer appearance seems spiritual, but when you dig into their lives, when you look into their checkbook, when you watch or check what streaming services they look at, their internet website, when you listen to their dinner conversation and how husbands and wives talk to them, there is no gap between outer appearance and inner reality. There are some people in your church who are faithful, and you should look at them and you should be inspired by them and you should model yourself after them. Scripture, number one, church tradition. But God has left a living memory of how He wants us to live out our faith. I know there are several individuals in this church that I believe I can and do learn from them in their spiritual lives. As I shared, when my wife and I were going through a tremendous difficult time in marriage, there were people here in this church, not staff members, that we call for help. And we're to seek them out and use them as our models to encourage us. Why? If you look at the next slide, if you will not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at that hour I will come against you. Obviously, this language is reminiscent of the gospel as Jesus talking about his disciples. Look, when you go through your ministry, don't assume that you have all the time in the world, because one day I will come like a thief in the night. So sober up and be alert. It's not like you have 10 years where you can try to question how you are doing as a church. You could be coming back today, tomorrow. You know, the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians that every church will stand before him. So that there are two judgments. Every single one of us will stand before the judgment seat of Christ, the Bema seat, where we will give an account of every word and how we spent our dollar and how we spent our time to Christ. Right? It's not for salvation, it's for reward. But there's a second judgment where we as a church community will stand before God and give an account for our ministry. And it will be tested by fire, and those ministries that are like gold, right? Gold, silver, and precious stone, it will survive because it will be pure. But there will be aspects of our ministry that is like wood, hay, straw, and like wax. When put to fire, it will melt away. And it will be in vain. And at the end of every year, we should sit down and ask, what's gold and what's wax? Because no church is perfectly gold. It's very possible that the Church of Sardis was once a faithful church. I think they were in the beginning. They were complete and full of integrity. And I think along the way, the first generation that planted the church were hugely faithful, and the buildings were built, and the ministries were started, and a good reputation developed. And then I think another generation arose that was riding on the glory of the coattails of the first generation. Just like the city, doing tremendously well until King Cyrus came, and afterwards they were a shadow of the past. Perhaps the good reputation came from their earlier generation, and they're just living off of its glory. You know, I'm involved in Korean ministries. Well, I was for a while, and most of the churches, there's first generation Koreans, Korean speaking, second generation English speaking. And first generation, when they get together, they have two criticisms about second generation ministries. Two criticisms. It's across the board, from New York to Texas to LA. Number one, second generation do not know how to pray. First generation, they know how to pray. You know, it's one of those Korean early morning prayer meetings, 5:30 in the morning from Tuesday to Sunday, and people gather together, and then they pray, and then they go to work. Second generation, I tried it as well. We tried to start early morning prayer meeting, and nobody showed up. It was just the pastor. It was a time for quiet time. You know, but they would not come because second generation do not know how to pray. Talking about Korean churches, and I have experienced this firsthand, both in the congregation and both in my own personal life. I do not pray as much as a first generation pastor. Secondly, they don't know how to give, not sacrificially. Yeah, first generation, they give out of their lack. You know, they give far more. But second generation, they say they give out of their abundance. And so it's not like the first. I probably agree with both criticisms for that, from that generation. I'm not sure second generation church is any stronger than the first. But in terms of faithfulness, there's a lot to learn. Maybe it's true of the Chinese ministry as well. And I think this is what's happening in Sardis. The first generation, you know, it's like the first wave Marines. They go in and they suffer, they struggle, but, it's blood, sweat, and tears. They will build a church. They build a church, and the second generation comes, and we're not quite gone through that suffering, and things are a little easier, and we take things a little bit more for granted. You know, it's like a restaurant. You ever had a favorite restaurant? You know, my wife and I, there's a sushi place out in Vienna, and it was our favorite restaurant because you could go for $16 and you get a small tray of sushi and then sushi rice. It's chari rice. Yeah, it's like sushi bibimbap. So best of both worlds. But it's a great deal. We get the food, and then one day my wife and I, we went and we ordered for lunch, and while we were eating, we're talking to each other. So, the quality doesn't quite seem the same. Seemed to have gone down a little bit. And I realized it in the salad, because before, when you get those little side salad, there was lettuce and then carrot and onion and one or two ingredients with the salad dressing. But, that one time we went, and forever afterwards, all I got was lettuce. It's lettuce. I remember taking that to my sister's home. We took a couple orders and we went, and then I started joking, you can't call this a salad. Salad by definition requires more than one ingredient, right? But if it's just salad, it's salad. It's not, it's just lettuce, it's lettuce. It's not a salad. And I was saying that, and my brother-in-law started laughing, and he says, well, it's probably because they changed owners. And it suddenly made sense to me. But I would have never known, because it's the same name, the same menu. But if you look just a little deeper, the quality has degraded because the new owners are riding on the glory of the coattails of the old owner. And I'm wondering how many second-generation churches in Korea, Korean as well as Chinese and others, that if you dig just a little deeper, we're riding on the glory of the coattails of the first generation. And I wonder how many of those churches, and this church itself, and excuse me for going further than my notes, because I've only been here 2 years, and I still don't know the church that well because of COVID. The last thing that I want to hear as a pastor of a church is that you look so good on the outside. But all I had to do was remove the outer veneer, and boy, you fooled yourself. Wasn't exactly what I wanted. So wake up. Because you don't have all the time in the world. Many ways, this sermon is for myself because I'm hitting 60. Hopefully this is my last ministry. And I don't want to end my last ministry with one that just looks good. And I spend 90% of my time wanting to look good. But I want a church where if you walk into the door and you spend a few months to a year and you begin to see, wow, it looks so good in the beginning. The people were so nice. And after all this time, I see that it's even better. Like I said before, you ever meet a new person and after a few weeks, like you don't want to be near them anymore because the first impression doesn't match the few months later? I want to be the kind of church where, well, the first impression is decent, but, the church is slightly on the older side, not just the building, sorry. But, people-wise, we are a little bit on the older side and all of that. But, man, after I've been here for 6 months, it's a place where I can grow. And I want to spend the rest of my life in a church like this because I want to serve God and find a community where I can share my deepest fears and they won't judge me. And I want a place where we can pray together. And I want relationships where when I am struggling, they will come by my side. And they will offer words of encouragement and pray for me. The 3 things. You don't need a brand new building. You don't need a stage. All you need are people who want to grow and seek God. May He be gracious to us. Father, this morning we do come to you. We ask that you would do major surgery in my heart, in the elder's heart, the OB heart, all the praise leaders, in such a way, oh God, that we would see your heart and we would become a church that is after God's heart. May that be our prayer, oh God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Please stand. Let's respond with Jesus paid it all.